Welcome everybody. Thanks for attending this workshop on a global open science cloud. This workshop comprises 4 sessions. This first session is setting the scene and looking at the landscape of open science activities globally and initiatives to support open science. There are also sessions on scientific projects and how they're supported by e-infrastructure and how they could be supported by global and international open science cloud or platform activities. The sessions on collaboration between e-infrastructure providers, and the final session looking at next step strategy and funding. This session aims to set the scene, to survey the landscape, and to introduce the initiative. And so before I do that, I should introduce myself. I'm Simon Hodson, Executive Director of CODATA. CODATA is the Committee on Data of the International Science Council, and I will introduce each of our panelists and speakers as they start their presentations. So as I said, this session aims to set the scene, survey the landscape, and introduce the initiative. So what is and what could be a global open science cloud? So at the moment, the Global Open Science Cloud, which we'll be presenting, is a project. It's a collaboration and it's a potential initiative. We'll hear from the speakers that open science is growing in momentum. It's becoming very much part of the way of doing science. Arguably it has been for some time in principle, but now with the digital age, we're seeing how that can be supported. And so we're seeing in particular countries and regions, efforts and investments to support open science in particular domains and to some extent across domains. And we're witnessing major investments in open science clouds or platforms or commons. And these initiatives have at least 2 motivations. There's more than these 2, but these 2 are among perhaps the most significant. To achieve from the funders and the institutional perspective economies of scale, but also to break down silos between domain infrastructures and to encourage collaboration across domains. And if that's happening on a national or a regional level, then the case can also be made that there is potential to achieve those benefits, economies of scale and breaking down silos globally, internationally. And at least something that we would want to ensure is that these investments in open science clouds, platforms, or infrastructures should not themselves create national or regional silos. So the Global Open Science Cloud project and the proposed collaboration, which we'll hear about in this session, aims to encourage dialogue and cooperation between such initiatives, and where possible, alignment and interoperability. And that interoperability can take place on a number of levels: on the policy level, on the infrastructure and the technical level, and on the data level to do with the semantics and the metadata. So we'll explore some of those issues in these 4 sessions and in this session. So that's quite enough for me by way of introduction. I'm now going to introduce our first speaker, which is Anna Persic from UNESCO. Anna is the Senior Program Specialist in the Division of Science Policy and Capacity Building, Natural Science Sector from UNESCO. And she's been one of the leading people from UNESCO for the draft UNESCO recommendation on open science, which Anna will introduce for us. Anna, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Simon, and thank you very much for the invitation. I think it's a very, very interesting project that you will be discussing these days, and in the global context of, advancing open science.
Sorry, just a moment, Anna. Yin, we're seeing the presenter view again. Can you move to full view? Sorry to interrupt there.
No problem at all.
If I had my way,
here we go. I can even do it.
Abolished. Right. Go ahead, Anna.
All right, but we can move to the first slide already to gain some time. So I was just saying it's really good to be in this workshop, and I'm also hoping to learn a lot, because the idea of a global open science cloud is really interesting, and it is something that keeps coming up in the discussions that we are having across stakeholders and across countries, in terms of what will be something necessary to, move forward with open science globally. Just very briefly, for those who don't know, or maybe are not very familiar with UNESCO and why the open science in UNESCO. So UNESCO is the UN agency in charge of science. The S stands for science, together with education, culture, and communication. And of course, while we have always been in charge, let's say, in the UN system of promoting science, technology, and innovation for the benefits of society, for peace and sustainable development, with the Sustainable Development Goals in particular, we have really seen a huge interest in science, technology, innovation as one of the key means of implementation, as we say, for achieving all the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We have also seen in particular how important it is to have timely and free access to scientific data, publication information, importance of scientific collaborations and sharing of information on all different levels, but also this growing importance of science policy society dialogue. And that is the key, most probably, to deal with some of the issues that we have today, which is also the mistrust in science and countering all this fake news that we can see around the world. Of course, the COVID-19 situation has brought up some of these issues even further. And I think there is really a lot of acknowledgement, particularly on the policy side and within member states, within governments, that there is need for a better access to science, and that there is need for open science more broadly. If we can move the slide, please. So in UNESCO, in the way that we see open science is really a movement that goes across the scientific process. So it doesn't only concern the outputs of science, such as possibly the publications, but really the principles of openness, and the openness should happen at each and every step of the process. And if that happens, in a way that is just and that is equitable, then we really do have open science as what we call a game changer or accelerator, particularly when it comes to implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, which basically cover all the big challenges that the societies are facing today. Another point of view for us where we come to open science is that open science really helps to achieve the human right to science, which is there in the Declaration on Human Rights, and is something that we haven't been talking a lot in the past, but it's coming more and more strongly, again, particularly now in the context of COVID-19. And this human rights to science, to enjoy the benefits of science, is something that open science definitely can promote as well. The next slide, please. So we have seen, and as Simon was saying, open science has been happening for a while, particularly moved forward with digitalization and with a few big initiatives, including those from the European Commission, for example, in the past, let's say, decade or so. And really the question is no longer whether it's happening, the question is how it's going to happen and how everybody can contribute and benefit from the transition. I think in UNESCO, as it is a global organization, the key worry is that open science would make even bigger the gaps between those who have and those who have not, while the idea originally behind open science is really to reduce these gaps between developed and developing countries, and between those who have and have not within countries themselves. So to make sure in a way that this transition to open science is as just and as equitable as possible, and contributes to the reducing the gaps in science, technology, and innovation across nations, the member states of UNESCO, 193 of them, tasked the organization to develop this global standard-setting instrument on open science in a form of a recommendation. So there are two ways for international organizations like UNESCO to set standards. two instruments that we have. One is a convention, which is more legally binding and a heavier process, let's say, to handle. The other one is the recommendations, which are not legally binding, but there is a monitoring mechanism which allows member states to report back and be accountable for the provisions that they have agreed upon in that particular recommendation. So recommendations really are very good instruments that UNESCO can come up with, where all the countries agree on certain provisions and then implement with the support of UNESCO and of course with the support of the global community. I'm going to move forward maybe a little bit faster. So we've started this process in November 2020, and the member states are supposed to adopt the final text in November 2021, so next year. We had in total 2 years. Let's say now we are kind of in the middle of the process. The member states have asked us to do a process and to develop this draft recommendation in a very consultative manner. And we really did try to consult as many people as possible, as many communities as possible. We did realize that open science in and out of itself is also a little bit fragmented. There is open data, open infrastructures, open access, open to society kind of with citizen science, but these communities don't necessarily speak to each other either. So we're trying to gather all of these inputs and put it under the same umbrella of this global recommendation. The first draft of the recommendation, which has been drafted based on these different inputs and also with the help of our advisory committee, so we had global consultations, we had regional consultations, stakeholder consultations, and the first draft has been sent to member states in September, at the end of September this year. It's available online, and we are inviting everybody to actually provide comments to this draft text by the end of the year. We are very keen on getting feedback on the draft text to make sure that we get it better and better as we move on. And then there is a second part where actually it's the member states who negotiate the draft text, and that's going to happen throughout next year. Next slide, please. So one of the key issues for this draft recommendation was to define open science, but keeping it as broad as possible, but then again also making people understand what it is. And for the moment, the definition that we have there is that it's an umbrella concept that combines various movements and practices to make scientific knowledge, data, and evidence available and accessible, increase collaboration and sharing of information, and open the process of scientific knowledge creation to societal actors beyond the scientific community.
Anna, 2 minutes.
Yes, I'll try to stick to the time. So if we move on with the slide, please. The important part also was to define these different elements of open science. We may have missed some, maybe not. I think what is interesting for this particular meeting is, of course, that open infrastructures are seen as incredibly important elements of open science, but they are seen in the context of the other elements as well. Next slide, please. There is a broad range of open science core values and guiding principles, which are now in the draft recommendation and which are extremely important because really it is for every element and for every action, these values and principles should be applied. So it's very important that we get these values and principles right and that we have all the countries and all the stakeholders adhere to those principles as well. Next slide, please. There is a series of actions and action areas that we have identified so far. Again, for the moment, we are still looking to expand if needed or reduce. But I think for the moment, it's a pretty interesting ensemble of actions. And again, they have to be seen as a comprehensive package. And the other thing is that we do have a specific, let's say, chapter or an array of actions on infrastructures and services. So if we can just move the slide very quickly. I will leave the slides with you so you can have a look at all the different actions more in detail. And of course, everything is in the draft recommendation. But I think in terms of infrastructures, I think the accent that is put there, of course, is a sustainable investment in open science infrastructures. would need to be community-led, interoperable, inclusive, interconnected, and sustainable as much as possible. There is the need for community agreements. There is a need for standards and best practices to be shared to ensure, again, that these open science infrastructures serve the community that they are supposed to serve. There should be a series of technical requirements, and we go a little bit more into detail on that, and some core specifications as well. Another point, or a few points, when we talk about open science infrastructures, and again, it might be interesting for this meeting in particular, which looks into a global open science cloud, is this importance, critical importance for joint strategies for shared multinational regional open science platforms. And that these strategies for these broad platforms should include aspects of policy practices and technical specifications. There should also, and this is maybe more addressed in other chapters, be a very big emphasis on capacity building at all possible levels, including when it comes to open science infrastructure. So any project on open science infrastructure should also include this big component on capacity building. So I'm going to leave it there just to give you an idea of where we are with the recommendation, because that is the context within, global context within which even this workshop is being held. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm happy to respond to any other questions.
Thank you very much, Anna, and sorry to rush. We've got 6 panelists, and so we need to get through in time. We've got an interesting question in the chat, which I've taken note of, and we'll come to questions at the end after all the speakers. So thank you very much, Anna. Moving on to our next speaker. The next speaker is Jeffrey Bolton, who's a member of the governing board of the International Science Council, so the parent body of CODATA, and he's also past president of CODATA, and he's been doing work on open science for a number of years. Jeffrey, over to you.
Well, good day, everyone, no matter where you are and no matter what time it is, wherever you are. So I've been asked to talk about the International Science Council's current action plan, in particular, the way in which it relates to open science. So can I have the next slide, please? For those of you who don't know, it's worthwhile simply saying what the International Science Council is. It has been in existence in one form or another for over 100 years. It's tended to act as a global voice for science. It's been an originator of many of the major international collaborative enterprises in science. It has around about 200 members comprising national academies, national science bodies, research councils, and of course the international scientific unions and associations. The map you see shows the membership pattern. There's a large gap in the middle and north of Africa, but that doesn't inhibit the council from engaging with those countries. It has regional offices in Africa, in Asia, and in Latin America and the Caribbean, and also regional social science councils in Africa, Latin America, Asia, and the Arab world. Next slide. It has a very large scientific network. Many of the bodies within that network are bodies that originated from ISC and its antecedents, or from collaborative enterprises. They're what I call its science support bodies, including CODATA, the World Data System, the International Network for Government Science Advice. Although there are ISC bodies, they operate pretty independently to their great advantage. There are the International Scientific Committees, which have been created largely from ISC, Antarctic Research, Ocean Research, and so on. The international research programs, with which many of you will be familiar, are CROP on the Poverty Program, IRDR, Urban Health and Wellbeing, Future Earth, and of course the Climate Research Program. And then the Global Observing Systems and funding programs, which are funded by external bodies, but are funneled through ISC in order they should appropriately and effectively allocate those funds. Next slide, please. Our current action plan has 4 major domains, which are in those 4 central blue blocks here, which we regard as relatively robust in the sense that they're likely to be important for the next few years, although we may add additional domains. The outlying boxes are the individual projects that relate to each one of those domains. Open science, in a sense, is a pervasive perspective, a pervasive attitude which underlies much of this work, but I put in bold there a number of projects which are very explicitly to do with open science. The digital planetary sustainability at the top left, data-driven interdisciplinarity, which CoData leads on behalf of ISC, global governance, clearly a crucial issue for any global science cloud, open science systems with a particular focus on open science in the global south, which I'll come on to talk to in a moment, and the future of scientific publishing, an absolutely essential issue that needs to be grappled with by the scientific community. Next slide, please. Now, it's all very well having those 4 domains, but all of us, I think, or most of us, recognize that actually the biggest and most urgent challenge for contemporary science is essentially identifying pathways to sustainability and promoting public policies that will advance societies in that direction. Next slide, please. Open science, we think of it as an open collaborative enterprise, and here we've identified a series of issues which are crucial issues for effective delivery of open science. It's science that's operationally connected. It must be globally inclusive, and I'll come back to that. It's societally engaged because, frankly, you can't get away with anything at the present era unless you engage with society, and it's action-oriented. Crucial issues are open access to what we call the record of science. That's not just the stuff we publish, and that's been published since the beginning of the scientific enterprise. It's also the outputs of science, the evidence of science, the data of science. In recent decades, we've been very sloppy in inadequately exposing our data. One of the great physicists of the last century, Richard Feynman, said very clearly, you must produce all your data, particularly the stuff you don't like. And the second key criterion, which I think is a principal issue for this meeting, is access to infrastructure. We need to change funding policies and practices. Assessment and reward system point our scientists away from open science rather than towards it. We have persistent global divides, which we must bridge. And of course, the large question is whether what we are doing could evolve into an enabling global commons. Next slide, please. So the African Open Science Platform is a major adventure which has been developing for several years and will go live on the 1st of January when its new director will take up post. It's based on having effective hard and soft infrastructures federated across African countries and coordinated in an effective fashion. It's based on outcome-oriented work, which is to bring African science together to address major issues, and the issues of outreach, engagement, education, and capacity building are crucial parts of that. Next one, please. The platform was designed on a hub and node structure. The hub will be located in Pretoria in South Africa. The nodes essentially located in what we've regarded as 5 regions of Africa: Southern, Eastern, Central, Western, and Northern Africa. A crucial principle is that it's Africa-led. Many initiatives, many internationally funded initiatives, as their funding has dried up, they have drained into the initiatives have drained into the sand, largely because there's been no infrastructural base, no institutional base on which to ensure sustainability of the objective. Africa has major structural problems: low investment in science, poor connectivity, electronic and also transport connectivity, low intra-African collaboration such that African scientists collaborate more with European and North American scientists than they can collaborate with each other. And because of that, there are a few critical masses. And it is that the pattern of infrastructure and delivery programs, those key structural problems which the platform seeks to address. Next slide, please. Now, what is interesting is that quite spontaneously, as the platform has developed, there have been approaches from the very well-developed Latin American systems, particularly in relation to publication, based on La Referencia and Red Clara, which have been developing now for 20 years, such that Latin American countries collaborate in these domains more effectively.
2 minutes, please, Jeffrey.
Of course, that discussion has been focused on collaboration in delivering what you see at the base of that slide. Good practice, shared good practice, a network for collaboration, equitable access publishing systems, and a voice for the Global South. There are incipient moves in Southeast Asia to develop an analogous platform, and one of the things that might deliver is a voice for the Global South in a way that science internationally has not heard it before. Those South-South discussions are enormously important. One of the difficulties of the modern world is that although we would like there to be an international science community, it is largely a community dominated by the global north. The major publications are all of them located in Europe and North America, and they disadvantage the South really quite dramatically. Developing that voice is crucial. And it's crucial, of course, because, and fundamentally, then we cannot solve global problems unless we have global engagement. And this is one of those ways of ensuring that one part of the crucial global engagement takes place. Thank you very much. I look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. And that was finishing before time. Thank you very much. So I'm the next speaker. Please can you show the slides, Jim? I'm going to nominate Sarah, who's very used to keeping me in check, to give me a 2-minute warning, please.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So my presentation is really very much following on from that of Jeffrey in particular, but the two previous presentations. And I'm going to talk about some of the co-data work in contribution to that ISC action plan, which we've heard about. Next slide, please. So as part of that action plan, you've seen this image before, co-data was invited to prepare a project or program that fits under that action plan and addresses some of the challenges, and in particular, those opportunities and challenges emerging from the digital age. Jeffrey described this as data-driven interdisciplinarity. As we've done that work to prepare this program, we have tweaked that title a little bit, and we're now going on under the title, Making Data Work for Cross-Domain Challenges. And I'll explain why. The premise of this activity is that the major pressing global challenges and human issues of the 21st century, some of those things that we've already heard about in the previous presentations, such as climate change, mitigation and adaptation, such as the growth of cities and the resilience of cities, such as disaster risk reduction, such as meeting the 2030 agenda in various domains. Those global challenges can only be addressed through research that works across disciplines to understand complex systems. And fundamentally as well, it requires our ability to create data relating to those challenges and to combine data from many different sources in order to understand and model and interpret those complex systems. So that ability to combine data from different sources is fundamental to addressing the global grand challenges. And we're seeing investment in open science and open science platforms also to try and facilitate that work of data interoperability, of combining data. one of the things which those investments seek to address is to make it more efficient and more effective to do that research. These figures from the PwC report for the European Commission, 80% of effort used, or research project effort, an estimate used on data wrangling, and a conservative estimate of 10.2 billion euros opportunity costs from suboptimal data stewardship. Investments in open science platforms seek to address those global grand challenges and to reduce the friction, if you like, in doing the research we need to do. Next slide, please. We've already heard from Jeffrey that the International Science Council for a number of years has sponsored and promoted global coordinating research projects to address these global grand challenges. For example, Future Earth on global sustainability and climate change, integrated research on disaster risk, the program on urban health and well-being. And so this program from CODATA, which we think is a fundamental issue and a major challenge, and therefore the work of a decadal program, seeks to assist and support those global coordinating research programs by addressing the data issues which are fundamental to their to those challenges. Next slide, please. We've been working for 2 years on the design of this program, and we've divided it into these 3 areas of activity. I'll start with number 2. This is working with existing domains on the data specifications and standards that they already use, and encouraging particular domains through collaboration with international scientific unions to address issues of interoperability and data combination in particular domains. Then we want to relate that and relate those advances to case studies in cross-domain research areas, and we've started work on resilient cities on infectious diseases, and an overarching activity which we call Making Data Work, a program of technical and consensus building activities for interoperability. Next slide, please. So through a series of workshops and projects, working groups, we now have, as part of the pilot activities for this decadal program, a suite of initial activities. The first 3 are very much technical in scope: a task group on digital representation of units of measure, which is fundamental to interoperability, a working group and other activities looking at semantic interoperability and good practice for semantic resources, how we look after them in the long term, for example, what's good practice for their technical representation. We've developed a very strong partnership with the DDI Foundation, and we're exploring a new specification from DDI called cross-domain integration, and we have a European Open Science Cloud co-creation funded project to test that specification in the context of the European Open Science Cloud. That work came very much out of some of these pilots or these initial workshops, including a series of week-long intensive workshops hosted at the Leibniz Foundation's Dagstuhl Center, and some of those photographs are from that. Then we have these 3 projects, or 3 working groups rather, on the case studies, looking at policy monitoring indicators, the SDGs and Sendai, work on infectious diseases, and work on resilient and healthy cities, particularly in partnership with the Urban Health and Wellbeing Program. And then the project that we're talking about today, as a result of the workshops held at the CODATA 2019 Beijing conference, a proposal was put into Chinese Academy of Sciences for a project to explore collaboration around a global open science cloud. And that will be one of the pilot projects for this initiative. And then in our partnership with GoFair, there's work on fair digital objects and fair implementation profiles. Next slide, please. A lot of that work and those working groups will be presented at the Fair Convergence Symposium, so a quick plug for that. There's an opening session on the 27th of November, and then the whole week from the 30th of November to the 4th of December. There's a number of sessions which are relevant to the activities that I've just spoken about, and there's information about the program and how to register on that slide. Next slide, please. Our objective, now having established those pilot activities, is to prepare the launch of the program. This will necessarily be collaborative. CoData is playing a coordinating role, but this won't, we won't achieve what we aim to unless this program is very much viewed as something that all organizations involved with data can feel ownership of and can participate in. And in particular, the Data Together organizations, GoFair, the Research Data Alliance and the World Data System, but other organizations as well. We're preparing documentation for a call for a management and oversight committee, and in the new year, we aim to issue calls for participation and collaboration of projects, program officers, and partners. Next slide, please.
2 minutes, Simon.
Thanks, Sarah. Our objective is to launch this Decadal program, Making Data Work for Cross-Domain Grand Challenges, at the ISC General Assembly and Global Knowledge Forum in Oman in 2021. So we've got a lot of work on our plate to meet that target. Next slide, please. And so as part of that, I've mentioned the Global Open Science project. As I said, it came out at the Beijing conference. One of the other outputs from that conference is listed on that slide, the Beijing Declaration. And we have a working draft for areas of cooperation, alignment, and interoperability. CoData has set up an internal, for the time being, working group to prepare a draft project plan for this CAS-funded project, which will be led by CNIC in China, but with international cooperation and coordination. We'll prepare that plan in collaboration with our colleagues at CNIC, and then share that with stakeholders from other organizations for input. As I said, there's these 4 workshops as part of the EGI conference, and there'll be a lot of information about it as well at the International Fair Convergence Symposium. I also wanted to mention a call for papers for a special collection of the Data Science Journal in relation to the UNESCO draft recommendation. Next slide, please. And this is my last slide. I wanted to flag these priority tasks for the Global Open Science Cloud, areas for cooperation and alignment. These are, right, that's my time. I'll just finish this slide. These areas for cooperation and alignment came out of the workshops we held in Beijing last year. They're a draft, but they're an indication of the topics on which we need conversations, cooperation, and we hope some coordination, alignment, and perhaps interoperability. Those topics have informed the Slido, which is linked there, and which Mark Dietrich will put a link to in the chat. We request participants in this workshop to comment and vote on those areas, and you're free to add other areas which may be missing. And we hope that one of the outputs from this workshop at the EGI conference will be a sounding and views and input from participants on these topics. Are there topics missing? Which are the most important? Which are less important for conversations, collaboration, and alignment towards a global open science cloud collaboration. And that, I think, is my last slide. Thank you very much. And so our next speaker, we have a 2-part presentation, so 5 minutes each. And first of all, Li Jianhui, who is Vice President of CoData, and I forget exactly your job title, Li Jianhui, Director of Science and Technology at the Computer Network Information Center, CNIC, of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. So, okay. Jianhui, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Simon. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. So I would like to share my preliminary idea about the GOSC. So next, please. Next slide, please. The first 3 speakers actually share their perception and plan for open science. We all know open science now increasingly become more and more important. So a lot of national, regional open science infrastructure, platform, or cloud have been developed, including European open science, in China, the China Science and Technology Cloud, etc., etc. So this is why, just as Simon mentioned, CODATA 2019 conference in Beijing. So there are several sessions focused on this issue. We are talking about whether we can coordinate this different national, regional platform to make a globalized platform for open science and open data. So this is why the GOSC was birth. So next, please. And what is GOSC? Actually, in my view, is I think it's firstly it's a cross-continental federated e-infrastructure and the virtual research environment for global cooperation and open science. That means firstly we should interconnect all these national, regional, or even institutional infrastructure platform. So we have to align the policy of data sharing or resource sharing. Also, we have to follow the interoperable protocols. We have to provide security and transparent services, and also maybe we should establish a sustainable operation mechanics. And for all the science community, the global science communities, so they can use a converged cloud services, just including the cross-continental data, huge data transmission, and even cross-border distributed simulation or big data analysis and process. And maybe they can also collaboratively to training the AI algorithm by machine learning on the federation learning, and maybe not move the data from one side to another side. They just make a federation learning. And maybe we can no restriction to access the fair data networks and knowledge graphs. So this is amazing landscape. But how to make it happen, make it a reality? So actually we have to cross the policy barriers, the cultural barriers, maybe the semantic barriers, the technical barriers, so many challenges. Next, please.
2 minutes, Shenhui.
Yeah. So we think Roma, we all know Roma was not built in one day. So we promote a long-term process driven by typical use cases, and we can from lightweight testbed to large-scale converged platform. So this picture highlights the iterative development and the continuous evolution cycle. And we should involve different stakeholders to co-design, co-development. So next, please. So CAS, just as Simon mentioned, the CAS funded a project we call the Global Open Science Cloud Initiative. This initiative also will be endorsed by CODATA. So we will explore the possibility of the GOSC and the co-development of cross-border testbed. So we have several key actions. For example, the communication, we will establish the international communication platform. We will do research on policies, and we will have implementation technology development. And last but not least, we will try to establish a testbed and make some demonstrations. As for the anticipated output, firstly should be have a consensus and global collaboration network on open science cloud and the framework for GOSC policy and techniques. So we will establish one cross-border testbed to demonstrate for global science collaboration and open science. If we can if all the objective was successful, so we will promote to launch one big science program for GOSC, maybe next 5 years. Okay, next. So we call for international partnerships. Today, we come together is a good beginning. keeping together is progress, which in the future we're working together. We're working together, maybe is a successful open science cloud. So that's what we wish we will have more cooperation in the future in this project. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Louis. Excellent. So I hope that's been a useful introduction and a very quick introduction to the project from CNIC and that invitation to collaborate. We now have Hussein Sharif. So to complement Jean-Louis' presentation, Hussein Sharif, who's director of the Al Mahad Mutagadem, I hope I pronounced that properly, Specialized Computing Training Center. Hussein, over to you.
Okay, this presentation is actually focused on the African input into Global Open Science Cloud, especially from the Sudan side. Next slide, please. So we'll be discussing about governance, scientific application, corporate application, and task groups, some decadal programs, and funding. Next, please. Next, please. So for the issue of governance and guidelines, frameworks, we currently don't have such guidelines and frameworks between the different continents, like from Europe has EOSC and China has CSTCloud, but in Africa is trying to develop the African Open Science Platform, and there is no guidelines and framework. So what we did was we presented a Global Open Science Cloud to ITU, and they have accepted it in their study group, and they're going to put it in their report as a tool for disaster risk recovery and so on. Next, please. So from the scientific application, from the perspective of Africa, there is EU and AU Memorandum of Understanding, and there is IST Africa programs in EU and so on. And these can be used for Global Open Science Cloud scientific applications. Next, please. For the corporate side, African Union has its own agenda on digitalization, and this agenda is very close to the description of Global Open Science Cloud. I mean, the intent of application of Global Open Science Cloud. And also, another aspect is there are international banks like Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, African Development Bank, and Islamic Development Bank that have actually programs to implement the basics of Global Open Science Cloud. So this, I think, is also a main, what you call approach for us from African side. Next, please. Most of the time, Global Open Science Cloud, the focus is on the data, but I'd like to focus also on the processing power of Global Open Science Cloud. And I make a suggestion that because at International Science Council, they have been sending a survey on decadal science sustainability issues. What we're proposing is that science right now is based on 6 dimensions, which is 3 dimensions of space, 2 dimensions of numbers, and 1 dimension of time. Next slide, please. We would like to propose that a new basis for the decadal should be n dimensions of space, n dimension of number, n dimensions of time. And when you work on computational machines, using the computation to generate n dimensions is not a problem. But we have to develop the scientific basis based on these expanded dimensions. And going forward in the decade and developing Global Open Science Cloud, we think that this should be considered as the main processing power also of Global Open Science Cloud, not only from data aspect, but also from the processing aspect. Also in core data, we have AI and machine learning decadal programs, and we suggest that the AI and machine learning also be based on these expanded dimensions, n dimensions of space, n dimension of numbers, and n dimension of time. And we suggest that there should be a task group in core data for computation and the AI task group to implement this.
90 seconds, please, Hussein. 90 seconds.
Yes. Hello?
I was just giving you your time warning. You've got 90 seconds.
Oh, okay. All right. So I'll go to the next slide. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is my last slide. And for the funding and sustainability, from the African perspective, we already submitted to Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank the implementation of Global Open Science Cloud within the Sudan context. And they have accepted this idea, and we are making very good progress in that. So I think from the funding side for Africa, we should consider making the African Development Bank, Islamic Development Bank, and the Asian Development Bank, and so on, to be part of the funding. I think this will enhance greatly the implementation of Global Open Science Cloud. And we have done it in Sudan, and I think we are getting good results, and we propose this to be also part of the funding for the sustainability of Global Open Science Cloud in Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hussein. Thank you very much. Okay, so our next speaker is Sarah Jones, who's the EOSC Engagement Manager at GEON, where she'll work with NRENs on supporting open science, and also, I forget exactly your role on the executive board, an independent expert
so
on the
yeah, one
executive
of the
board.
independent experts and chair the FAIR working group. Yeah.
Okay, over to you, Sarah.
Excellent. So I'm going to talk about EOSC just as an example of like a open research commons or cloud, and also how we're trying to develop EOSC in a way that we're co-building it with other similar initiatives. So if you move to the next slide. So for anyone who's unfamiliar, EOSC is, well, technically the European Open Science Cloud, but there is debate about whether those are the right words. I think the acronym is something we'll definitely stick with. And what we're doing is trying to develop a platform for European research. So when we've been describing it most recently in the Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda, we've talked about this web of FAIR data and related services. So we're trying to federate the different e-infrastructures and research infrastructures and provide an environment in which the data can be brought together with those relevant services so that, you know, researchers can do much more. They can bring together different data sets from different backgrounds and address the societal challenges. And you can see here in the kind of diagram, we have this notion of like a federating core, and then we're bringing together the data sets and then all of the services in this EOSC exchange. So next slide. So over the last 2 years, there's been a governance structure for EOSC. The European Commission and the member states set up an executive board, which is what I sit on, along with a number of different community representatives. There's also a governance board, which is all of the representatives from the member states. And the idea is that this governance structure steers the implementation. So there's been a lot of investment from projects, from the different countries, and broad coalition of the doers. So we've had a series of working groups to try and steer the work going on. The next slide. And those working groups are focused on looking at the EOSC landscape and the sustainability models. We've been developing rules of participation to think about what it means to be a user of EOSC or a provider in EOSC. And then there've been some kind of more technical implementation groups, the architecture, FAIR, and the skills group. Next slide. So what we've been developing, this is essentially like our remit over the 2 years. We've looked at what's happening across the member states to take stock of the current landscape and readiness. We've defined these rules of participation. These are EOSC focused, but I think these elements of kind of governance and participation are applicable and useful to collaborate on internationally. And then we've done a lot of work around the financing model. We've established a legal entity to take the work forward. There's now an EOSC association, and we've been looking at the kind of post-2020 governance and the funding structures. And then in terms of the architecture and FAIR, we've developed the EOSC architecture and AAI. We've been looking at research software. We've been developing this interoperability framework and persistent identifier policy and how we implement that. And then we've been looking at FAIR metrics and also the curricula, the kind of skills that people need. And a lot of these elements on the technical side, I think this is really where there needs to be global collaboration. So obviously we need a PID policy for EOSC, but the PID infrastructure we're using, is global infrastructure. And I think we need to be working collaboratively. And I'm very glad to see that a lot of the work we've done, we've had international participation and feedback on our different consultations. Next slide. So there is lots of progress to date. There's lots of documents you can look at. I've just listed them all here, but by all means go to the EOSC Secretariat website. Some things are still open for consultation. So if you are interested or if you're doing parallel work in your own countries, please do feedback on what we're doing in Europe. Next slide. So just to set EOSC in context, this is like a EC funded initiative together with the member states. But there is this whole wider European data space agenda. So delivering data spaces in the different kind of thematic areas. So the Green Deal or the agricultural data space. And EOSC is seen as a kind of horizontal that cross-cuts all of these. And I think those aspects around interoperability, because you need community standards to make sure that people can understand the data, but we also need to promote discovery across different research domains, and where possible to allow the kind of coordination and combination of different data sets. So I think that's really where EOSC plays a role. Next slide. And I think these goals that we have within EOSC, the fact that we're trying to bring together disconnected silos, we're federating infrastructure so that it's easier for researchers to discover and combine data and do their research. I think that's a common goal. I'm sure that's what many of you are trying to pursue in your own data commons or in the various initiatives we've heard about already. The next slide. So one thing we've done within EOSC, and we've actively used the Research Data Alliance as a global forum, because there's a lot of relevant groups there that are looking at some of the aspects we've been working on, like the PID policy or like metadata standards for discovery. And I find RDA is quite a rich forum to see what's happening elsewhere, to copy what works in other countries, and also to learn from other people's mistakes. It's a good way to try and get a sounding board for your ideas, but also to co-develop things internationally. And I think that leads to much more robust and internationally applicable solutions. So it may take you longer. This is one of Hillary's favorite proverbs, but it's actually, you get much richer outcomes. And I think that's one thing I would really encourage in this space, that we should be collaborating globally on the open research commons. It's not something that's a unique problem to, Africa or Europe or a particular discipline. It's something that's a very shared initiative or aspect of work for us to go on. So my final slide, which is a bit of a handover to Karina here, is about a group that we've set up within the RDA. So we have this Global Open Research Commons interest group. Together with Simon and others, we ran a series of BOFs, Birds of a Feather sessions, where we looked at the need, to collaborate in this space, and we took stock of the different initiatives in Europe and Africa and Australia and elsewhere. And we've now developed an interest group, and this interest group is really to provide a neutral space where people can have conversations around those open science commons. And we're trying to define a shared understanding of the commons. So we've been working on a definition. We've been working on, what are the building blocks? What are the common elements that we're all addressing? And where are there opportunities to collaborate there? So certainly around some things around, the standards that we're using and the interoperability. There's definite points of collaboration. Some of the aspects around governance and sustainability, it may be different in each context, but I think there's still a lot we can learn from each other there. So I would encourage you to engage with this group, and you'll hear a lot more about it from Karina. She'll talk about the activities we've had to date. So that's all I had to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That was well under time.
I'm always quick.
Okay. Thanks for introducing Karina. So that's very helpful. So Karina, really, over to you. Karina Pascu is from the European Commission, and as Sarah said, she's one of the co-chairs of that the interest group, the Global Open Research Commons interest group. Karina, over to you.
Thank you very much, Simon, for the kind invitation to be today in this workshop. As Sarah also explained to you, recognizing the need of and addressing this need to move forward with the Global Research Commons, given there are so many initiatives around national, regional, domain or discipline-based. So our group, you see it on the screen, has been set up last year. So it has a number of co-chairs coming from many continents and regions and countries. So what we're trying to do here, next slide please, is to, as Sarah also mentioned it, to get an understanding of what the common is in this research data space, what we call Open Research Commons. First we will focus on the data commons, and then to extend to the Open Science Commons as the work would progress in the common years. We would also proactively look outside of the RDA community to connect with other initiatives, either national or regional or international initiatives. So I can give you here the example of a G7 Open Science Working Group that was set up in 2016 within the G7 group, and that which is co-chaired by the European Commission and by Cabinet Office of Japan, and it has members from all the G7 members, and it's very actively working on international, let's say, policy alignment on open science. In two particular areas, which is public access, including incentives and rewards, and also infrastructures for open science. And again, finally, just one last point is our work. It aims to coordinate this delivery of global open research commons and monitoring the progress made within other RDA working groups, so across some other groups that are somehow related to our work. Essentially, we need to understand how to connect the national-based data commons with some other pan-regional or domain or discipline-based initiatives. So this is a very huge endeavor. Next slide, please. So we started in 2018 with a number of events that we have both, like Sarah mentioned, we organized in Berlin in March 2018, and then again in November 2018 in Gaborone. Also for RDA, starting with 2019 in Philadelphia, in the plenaries, 13th plenary in Philadelphia, and then again last year in Helsinki in October, when the group was, the interest group was launched. We also co-hosted a session in the 2019 CoData conference in Beijing, where we were together with Simon there and trying to understand a little bit how we can collaborate in this together across so many international initiatives and identify a number of areas where we can work on. Simon put you on the screen a number of lines of work and priorities that we would need to focus in the coming years. So we're going to have, last but not the least, we're going to have a meeting of the interest group this year in the P16 plenary, the 16th plenary, initially foreseen to be held in Costa Rica, now is going to be held virtually due to the COVID pandemic. The interest group meeting, I would encourage you all to engage in there and participate, and we're going to have another both dedicated to set it up to an international benchmarking working group. Next slide, please. So as Sarah also mentioned it, first of all, we would like to reach an understanding of what the common is in the research data space. And as a result of that, we're going to propose a general description of an open research commons that is going to come out in the form of a white paper on definitions. And then to identify the common elements that can be used to propose a typology of commons, and to a white paper on a typology. And then we're going to validate these two things, the definition and the typology, in this IG meeting in the sixth plenary of the RDA. And also, we're going to identify some a concrete use case for implementation in the form of a first working group working on international benchmarking and we're going to have a working above to gauge the interest of the members of the group and some other interesting members in the RDA and experts in creating this working group on international benchmarking. Next slide, please. So actually what we think about the destination of a global open science, as I name it, is that the open science is not an end in itself, as we also heard today, but it is for science and society as a whole. So why to have a research common is to provide these digital research resources for the common good. And our reflection, internal reflection in the group is what do actually need to build a research common. And we came to think that we need the data, services, and tools that people might need to answer their questions, research questions. So contribution to this discussion will go on. So as I said, we're working on a definition of the framework to describe the commons, and all the contributions will be consolidated and used to create a first output of the group. Next slide, please. Well, when it comes to a typology of research commons, we have considered multiple dimensions, the geography, like national, regional, international, the discipline dimension, and the structure, whether it is a centralized or a federated structure. So we came up with an initial comparative typology that was presented in the 13th plenary and then in the G7 Open Science Working Group in June 2019. And this initial typology considers several dimensions like governance, rules of engagement, data, services and tools, infrastructures, business models, and sustainability. As Jeffrey mentioned, that it's a very important dimension, but also incentive and skills, which are also important in terms of a human dimension. So what exists, what are the strengths and gaps in terms of a skills landscape. And then we further examine the potential for further coordination in the core data session that we had last year in Beijing. Next slide, please.
2 minutes, Karina.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So in addition to the overarching work in the interest group, we're going to use the organize a both session as I said, in the next RDA plenary to gauge the interest of the group to advance a little bit more the work on international benchmarking, and the relationships to the global commons typology and to propose a global commons roadmap. So this work has been led by two colleagues, in particular Karen Payne from IDC WDS from Canada, and also Mark Leggett from RDC Canada. Next slide, please. So in response to Simon's call for data together, our group is also looking forward to this our group collaboration as a good use case for the data together effort. And we're here to listen to you and to get questions from me, whether you have some more either in the chat or in the Slido. And two of my fellow coaches are here today. I believe it's Andrew Treller And also it's been Sarah Jones, so I think they will be happy to chip in whether if there is anything I forgot, or there is a need to put some more feedback into the discussion. Thank you very much, Simon, and thank you everyone for listening to me today.
Thank you very much, Karina. And thank you very much to all our speakers. We have, thanks to the incredible discipline of our speakers, we have 20 minutes for discussion between the panel and to respond to questions from the participants and audience of this session. So please can I request that the panelists open their cameras, switch their cameras on. So the first point I'd like to make is, as I mentioned in my slides, and this has been linked in the chat, we've set up a Slido, which we would appreciate participants of this workshop and the following workshops in this session, in this series. Please comment, vote, upvote. You can I don't think you can downvote things in this system, but you can certainly upvote them. You can add anything that's missing, and you can comment. So we'd very much like you to, we'd be very grateful if you could engage with that system and that process to give us an idea of what this community, the EGI conference community, how you view this list of topics and what you think are the most, the priority areas. So that's a flag for that, and the link's in the chat and was on my slide. So hopefully you can find that and follow that. Now I'd like to turn over to discussion between the panelists and to respond to any questions. Please put your questions into the chat and I'll read those out. But first of all, I'd like to move through three topics. Firstly, what is and what could be? Well, firstly, what is the Global Open Science Cloud project as it starts off? What are the main challenges for that and related issues, such as the Global Open Research Commons interest group? And what should the focus of activities be? So those three topics. What is it at the moment? What are the major challenges? And what should it do? So to start that, Jean-Louis, perhaps you could reiterate the funded project that you're leading at the moment. Could you describe how you see that project pursuing its work over the next 5 years, and then we'll bring in the other panelists for their view of what the challenges are.
Okay. Yes, I just have 5 minutes, so I'm very fast. So I will add some information about the project. So this project actually was approved by CASC headquarters. So it's the main is foster or makers of science cooperation in the future. So on this project, try to actually based on the China Science and Technology clouds, the resources. This cloud, including the infrastructure services and the scientific data services, and also the scientists can share the open science, open resource science software, and even we try to make a convergent in virtual research environment for our scientists, for CASC scientists. But now we wish our infrastructure can be interoperable with the international platforms to support our global science cooperations. For example, the SKA project, SDG researches. So in my mind, I think firstly we should have some policy, cross some policy barriers to make us, we can, our infrastructure, our data can be, interoperable with the international platforms. And then we wish we can try to establish the test bed to test whether our idea is possible, or it is provide a valuable service for science community or not. So in my mind, the firstly, the priority firstly should the policy issues. Secondly is make the infrastructure interconnected, and then we should have some typical showcase and to test based on this test bed. So that's my additional information for our project. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Louis. So just a reminder to our panelists, I wanted to ask Jean-Louis to describe the project, and then we'll move on to what our view of the main challenges are and what the focus of this international cooperation, the project and the interest group and other activities should be. We're privileged in this panel to have representatives from two major global organizations, an intergovernmental organization in the form of UNESCO and an inter-scientific organization in the form of ISC. So first, Anna, and then Jeffrey, please. Could you comment on what you've heard in this discussion of the Global Open Science Cloud, Global Open Research Commons, and from your perspectives, Anna, from the perspective of the work of UNESCO and Open Science, Jeffrey, from the perspective of ISC and the action plan that you work on, could you comment on what you've heard? And could you say from your perspective, what you see as the significant challenges for these coordinating and cooperation activities? Anna first, please.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. These are very, very good questions. I think what was just said now, focusing first on some policy issues and then dealing with technical issues is a good strategy to move forward. And it probably should kind of go hand in hand, because the policy should also follow what the technicalities are or what the technical issues may be. I mean, from our perspective, and here again, I'm not an expert in clouds or open science infrastructure. It's really the capacity. I mean, if it is the global open science cloud, then really, I guess the focus should be where the major gaps are. And we know that those are in developing countries. And we also know that connectivity to start with is already a huge issue. So while we move on to develop something like a global open science cloud, I think there needs to also be work done to really ensure that the connectivity issues are solved, that you do have hubs in different countries across the world that can connect to it, that you really, again, do not leave a part behind, which will then be even more left behind if everybody else is connected. So I think really from our perspective, what is incredibly important is to really make sure that you do have on board every part of the world, and those that you do not, to be very clear about it and find ways of engaging with those as well. So I think from our point of view, definitely, the accent on the gaps and on those who are the least connected is the most important part of the project. Another important issue, I think, is sharing of good practices. Obviously, there are platforms and clouds that already perform very well. Sarah has talked about it. Corina has touched upon different projects as well. Hussein also, it's good that those who are more further in the ways that they have developed their platforms share good practices and not good practices with those who are kind of catching up, because a lot of money, efforts, time can be saved in really making sure that this is that the good practices are shared. But I think the capacity issue is going to be the key one, and that's really where the effort should go, to make sure that it truly is a global cloud and that it is accessible globally, and that you do have people from developing countries in particular who can access to it.
Thank you very much, Anna. And if I may, I'll reiterate those three important points. Make sure that the developing countries or the global south is involved. Ensure, while we're addressing some of the more advanced technical issues, that the fundamental connectivity issues are addressed, and sharing good practices across these issues. I think those are three important points. Jeffrey, would you like to add to those?
Unmute.
Yes.
Yes.
You're muted now.
Two fundamental concerns for me, which I think are big challenges, which we haven't addressed. The first one is that whatever emerges from this, it mustn't be clunky, it mustn't be bureaucratic, and it mustn't be inefficient. And that relates to my second point. Those who advocate, implement, think about, discuss, and organize about, to a degree, open science and open science platforms are not, in general, working scientists. There is a gulf between those of us who are advocating something that we believe is of enormous potential value and the reality of doing science on the ground. Partly that's because of the incentive systems at the moment, which don't encourage people to share. And partially it's because people don't see the point. Now, there are some domains of science where the idea has been sold and bought and is effective. So, for example, in bioinformatics, it was driven, the developments in bioinformatics were driven by people doing bioinformatics science who could see the virtue of sharing their data, being able to access a communal data source, and doing it through processes and procedures which are very well defined. So within the disciplinary space, you have a means whereby practicing scientists and technical experts and organizers can come together driven by a common view. The real problem we have in thinking about something that is larger and global is that it's inherently multidisciplinary, and a large number of the disciplines involved don't really care too much. Of course, almost any scientist will say, do you believe in open science? Of course, we'll say yes. You prepared to let me see your data? Forget it. I mean, most of us recognize the problems, and my sense is the next step in this is somehow to bring the scientific community on board. Now, the representative bodies of science have an important role to play. Scientific unions, associations. You, Simon, will know how difficult it is even to get them to engage. And I think that we should spend some time thinking about how this can develop as not only a top-down enterprise, which it largely is, but also a bottom-up enterprise. Then it will begin really to take hold.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeffrey. So I think if I can summarize and move on to this discussion of challenges, at least two there have been identified by Anna and Jeffrey. One is, and they can be characterized as divides. One is the divide between the global north and the global south. The other is the divide between scientific practitioners and e-infrastructure providers. And we've heard in that last discussion, we've heard about that for many years, that this gap, if you like, between scientific engagement with the infrastructure, involvement in the design, and the services that are provided. And we hear about that for some time. So perhaps if I can pass to Sarah and then Karina, could you comment on those two divides perhaps, or if you wish, illustrate other challenges which you think need to be addressed by these global open science cloud open research commons initiatives?
So I think they're really important points that have been raised by Anna and Jeffrey, and that comment about, you know, the research community engagement, making this part of the research culture, takes me back to the work that I did with yourself, Simon, on the FAIR Data Expert Group, because, you know, in terms of how you implement FAIR or open science, a lot comes down to the practice in a given research community and making that part of the common practice and understanding, you know, what kind of incentives are needed to actually reward people for that kind of practice and build it into the career progression, but also to invest in developing the relevant standards so that it's easy to make data fair or to be open. And I think when we're building these open science commons or platforms, we really have to engage research communities. And I do personally find it troubling if you have, you know, over heavy e-infrastructure and just looking at the technical element and not really looking at the research community practice, because you absolutely need that there. And that's one of the things that, you know, I'm hopeful is a bit of a change in how we're addressing things in EOSC, that the research infrastructures are more central to the kind of core projects, and I think should have a very key role throughout them. It should be a much more of a collaborative endeavor. In terms of the connectivity, I'm kind of new in Giant, but I think there's a lot that can be built off networks like that. You know, there are the national RENs, but then also the regional RENs. And I think there's already, what I've seen from Giant, and what's kind of impressed me is that there's a very strong community. And I think it's never just the technology, it's the people that make things happen as well. And I think there's a lot that you could leverage off that to ensure that you do have the connectivity, but then going beyond that to, you know, the infrastructure and the support to, you know, share and work with data. The one challenge or reflection I would give, I was doing a workshop last night, which was about delivering data services, and we were looking at how institutions either provide or procure services or go into partnerships. And one of the things that came out of that for me is that we often have quite individualistic thinking because of the way things are set up. Research institutions are competitive. They want to make sure that they are well equipped and are faring well against their peers. So often there's a disincentive to collaborate. And I can imagine the same happening in this kind of commons infrastructure. You know, in Europe, we want to make sure we do things well for Europe. We want to be ahead of our peers. But actually, the challenges we all face are global. I think we really have to push people to try and think bigger and more collectively. And it's difficult to do that. It takes longer, it's harder work. You have to each be willing to sacrifice things because it's a partnership, you know, you don't get your own way with everything. But I think ultimately the result in the end is better. So I think trying to have more of a sectoral thinking, trying to think across the disciplines and across the different country divides is really important. And that's something that, you know, I would really like to see addressed more in this space.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Karina, would you like to illustrate your view of or build on that and illustrate your view of the challenges?
Yeah, thank you very much, Simon. Yes, to start with, I think open science means different things to different people and different institutions at different levels. So, for instance, what the Commission, for the Commission, open science is an approach to a scientific process based on collaboration, cooperative work, and sharing of information. And as we say, as early as possible, as open as possible, as close as needed. I think it's also the link to between the science and society. So this societal engagement, which is essential, and I think Sarah also picked up on this point. And then a science common cannot be built without open science. So we need a set of principles, so universal values, and also need an architecture and open research. To achieve a science commons, I think we should rethink the structural relationship between funders, academics, and institutions. And we need to interlink the platforms, the policies, the technologies, and also the so-called social infrastructures. These are critical layers, I think, for open science, and each of these layers are necessary, but none of which is sufficient on its own. So we need to marry all these elements, all these layers, and everyone has a role to play, from individual level to institutional level. And Eva Mendes from the Open Science Policy Platform, I think she mentioned it in another session earlier today. The goal is to lift the barriers to scientific research. This is what we say, open science is not the end of in itself, but we do it for the science and for the society at the end of the day. Also, I think we need to think of pathways to a global governance. So what kind of the governance model could be followed at the regional or international level? What feature this model could have, because we're speaking about an open global science commons. So we need to understand how to connect all these national based or regional based data commons with within at others at international levels, but also with domain or discipline based. And at the end of the day, we need both. We need the top-down policy to bridge the top-down and policy also with the community bottom levels. So, for this, we need also policy alignment. So alignment of policies and on open science, but also sharing good practices. And I think in this respect, the G7 Open Science Working Group has been, the work in these groups has been instrumental in as an element, let's say, as a player in this science diplomacy field, which I can call open science diplomacy field, maybe. Has been also always support as a like a mid-level bridging these two levels. So this is what we think. At the end of the day, the community is very important, but also we need the policy alignment, so the policy level. Thank you very much, Simon.
Okay, thank you, Kyrinos. Yeah, so I think we're close to the end, but I'd like to close with one theme that I think's come out, and it's going back to this interface between what domain scientists or even cross-domain case studies require and how we provide those services. And so, Karina, you said top-down policy at one point and then policy alignment, and those are perhaps two different things. Looking through the chat, there's a number of comments on, okay, one of our problems has been, how do we encourage the interface between research groups or research domains and the infrastructure providers? A lot of people writing in the chat that that's a good thing, but also the danger of that leading precisely to bespoke tools for particular projects which don't interface with others. How do we square that circle or cross that divide between providing the tools that researchers need and scaling those tools such that they are interoperable? And I wonder if, very quick, if anyone could raise their hand on their camera from the panel and anyone provide a very quick answer to that. Sarah.
Yeah, I think it's all down to standards. You know, like you have to have the domain standards, and then we have to have abilities to have crosswalks between those standards and to have, you know, more generic standards at different levels. And if you're not using standards, then you're never going to be able to, you know, work across that. But I think it's important to have things at the domain level as well.
And they have to come out of the community, but ultimately we hope that they'll be international. Jeffrey, you raised your hand as well.
Yeah, historical point. Many of the disciplines of science in the 19th century were deeply concerned with nomenclature. The geologists, the biologists, the physicists, the chemists, you name it, everyone organized their nomenclatures, their systems, their definitions, and so on. Its benefit has been absolutely enormous. We couldn't work without it these days. And the interesting thing is that the same international bodies, the international unions and scientific associations that are the inheritors of the jobs that were done in the 19th century, don't take the same view of the data business. And actually, organizing the standards for the data in your discipline and ensuring they're interoperable is exactly the same job as was done with great benefit of the 19th century. But that's the problem now. And somehow we've got to get back to those disciplines. And I mean, again, Simon, you will know this very well, and persuade them that their responsibility now, there's a recurrence of their responsibility in this domain. And I agree entirely with Sarah, standards are crucial.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Something that and obviously I agree very fully with that, standard specifications, nomenclatures, but perhaps we can, I'll raise one issue and maybe Anna will respond. Something that has emerged very much from the advisory group is this observation that yes, we need standards, yes, we need nomenclatures, but the creation of those standards, historically again, has not involved all participants and all of the world. That applies to standards categories in social science surveys, in censuses. People might be aware of this, how categories of social categories were described, how even sex and gender is described in censuses and social surveys. It applies to standards in terms of phonetics, and we find that many languages don't have the phonetics that they use described in international standardized nomenclatures. It applies to soil types and botany, etc., etc., etc. So there's a need for a global conversation on the setting of these standards. And I think that features prominently in the draft recommendation. Anna, do you want to comment? I probably went into too much detail there.
No, this is very true, and I completely agree with you. And I do think a conversation at the global level is extremely important, and an agreement on the global level is important. But to make sure that, I think, to have the voices from different regions heard at the regional level also. And when we say regional, we think, you know, Europe, North America, Africa, maybe Arab states. It also has to be pretty strong at the regional level, because at the global level, inevitably you cannot get all the voices, right? So you will get a lot, but if the region is very strong, if in the region there are a few bodies or a few initiatives that are leading and that can engage the actors from the region in this global conversation, I think that's that's a good step forward. And that's why, for example, in the open science more broadly conversation, the fact that the African Open Science Platform is being created is extremely important, because inevitably the voices of African stakeholders are going to be heard more. So while we work on the global level, it's also important, from what we've seen, is that the regional levels are also equipped to be able to provide input and then to implement whatever comes from the global level as well. And again, in this, you know, top-down, bottom-up combination of how things should work forward.
Okay, so thank you. I believe I need to wrap up. I'm enjoying this conversation, but I believe I need to wrap up now so people can have their lunches and prepare for the next sessions. So I would like to thank all the panelists and the speakers for their input. I'd like to thank I've been looking at the chat. There haven't been many questions. There have been a lot of comments and agreements or disagreements, but not a number of specific questions. But I hope I haven't missed anything important. But I'm sure that chat will be saved, and this session is being recorded for anyone who's missed it or would like to review it. And I think the presentations will be shared, Jeffrey. I'll point out that there's been a cut and paste error on the slide here, which will be corrected. Jeffrey's not with UNESCO, but with ISC. And I'm sure
shucks, you're not going to get paid, Jeffrey.
No.
So thank you very much, everyone. Thanks very much for the participants. I'll not attempt a summary of our discussion, but I think a number of key points have emerged. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you. Thank you, bye.